Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Deep State. This is a segment of censored news from the Dr. Deep State perspective. Today, we're going to go around the world and look at some headlines, everything from the immigration crisis that's facing the West, all the way to transhumanism and bedbugs and brain chips and mRNA being inserted into our food. And the question, of course, is how do all of these things connect? And I've been dealing with this for quite a few years. It's kind of the question I've been asking throughout Dr. Deep State. I've been asking it and trying to answer it in Seeing Through the Singularity. And certainly, I think, doing a more definitive attempt at it in my forthcoming book, In Pursuit of the Metaverse. Um, a lot of these stories can be linked together by certain prophecies, by insiders or people that are intelligent assets, like Jacques Attali or Yuri Harari. And I do want to touch on some of those ideas, but I want to connect them through another sort of common concept. So I was just going to kind of rip into the stories and lay out all this black pill stuff. And it sort of an idea hit me that I want to discuss. So I jotted down a few notes. So I hope you stick with me. But number one, I got a lot of mail this week. Not a lot. I got some mail that I really appreciate during the week. I do want to put my mail down there. I I don't do the Patreon thing. I guess maybe I get fed sometimes by people that do deliver mail to me. Places like Australia and Ireland. I got a question about the Jesuits, and I like these things, um, especially right now. I sort of sometimes kind of almost feed off these things. Not that you have to do it, but just sending me a letter and touching in and knowing that I have people listening from different places around the world kind of keeps me going. So I did have an event after I'd published The Singularity and I got a censorship strike and I got triggered and I felt self pitying and I took down all my videos for 9 months. And the idea was nobody gets my book, nobody gets me. And some people found out a way to contact me and badgered me and told me I need to keep going and they valued what I was doing. And at the time, it meant a lot to me. And I got back on and forced myself. And I don't know if all the videos are up anymore. I used to drive in my car and pull together the ideas that were the germ of In Pursuit of the Metaverse. And and yeah, it eventually got me going and got me back in the game. So here we are today. Um, so here's what I want to do. I want to, before I begin all these stories, kind of just recap, if I can, off the top of my head, the totality of these ideas in the Dr. Deep State perspective and how everything fits together. I mentioned last time that I believe essentially what's going on in the world is an ontological war against reality. And reality, I defined as both the ability of us to hold together the transcendent and the immanent realm, the heavenly and the earthly. And that attempts today to shape our mind through film or television, media generally, the schools, but especially attempts at censorship are attempts to bring all reality into the immanent frame. And from that frame, we can create these things called egregores, which can function almost like truth, but they're always missing a core of reality. And I can get into that in just a moment. So this war is going on between the two frames of reality, the totality of reality, and the idea that this reality has to be scrunched. So one of the, throughout my life, I was actually an agnostic. Starting when I was 18, I didn't know. I was still culturally kind of connected to the tradition, and I was a Lutheran, and I was always, I just felt like I was, but I didn't know if the Bible was real. I just didn't know. As an agnostic, I just didn't know and wasn't particularly interested. But one of the claims that I will make fundamentally is that the Bible's real. So the Bible represents reality, and the fullness of reality can be discovered in Christ's church. And that reality that's in its fullest needs to be historical, hierarchical, and sacramental. So the attack on the totality of reality is going to be an attack on the historical, the hierarchical, and the sacramental. So just bearing that in mind. So with the idea that the Bible, to me, that I'm convinced to the core of my being is reality, the Bible tells this story that talks about our predicament today and all these black-pilled stories, and how should we even think about this? So we know that the Bible begins with Adam and Eve, and they're connected, completely connected with God in this ontological space. And they consume the forbidden fruit, and God curses them. And he says, this is the fall. You're going to live in a new condition. But I have a plan for redemption. But what you have to hold in your mind is there's going to be a tension in this new reality. And you have to be able to identify the enmity that exists in your new reality. And that enmity would be the distance he put between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. Now, Jesus will tell us that this is a secret that was lost from the foundations of the earth, but he is going to reveal it. And so we could pick up on this story with Jesus himself, who comes into earth as God. He's from a transcendent space, and that means he's beyond time and space, and God is beyond his creation. He's almost unknowable, except he reveals himself in the character of Jesus Christ, the person of Jesus Christ. So when Jesus comes and he speaks both temporally to the time and place and the people he's with, but he also speaks in the eternal realm. So when he speaks, we can get something from that today. So I want to kind of look at that enmity as it's playing out, and he reveals it, the secret that's been hidden from the foundations of the earth. And last time we picked up the story about Jesus with his entourage, and Jesus says, I want to go into Jerusalem. And they tell him, that's where the Jews live. And Jesus realized they live in fear of the Jews. And that is not understanding the totality of reality, who is Christ himself, both the immanent and the temporal, and his mission to go in. So in revealing this secret that's been lost since the foundation of the world, Jesus goes in and he'll do some crazy things, like perform miracles, one of which was raising somebody from the dead. And even when he does that, these characters called Pharisees, and I'm going to be using that word from now on. I used to use it in the past, but I'm going to use that as the type of people that are enemies of Christ, enemies of reality. They say to him, you broke one of our laws. And Jesus questions them. You're sitting on the seat of Noah, but he's going to call them out. He's going to say, you are of your father, the devil, and the deeds of the devil you will do. And that's heavy. And that's the secret that's being revealed. You're sitting on the chair of Noah, you're phony balonies. You're not who you say you are. You're in fact Edomites, because part of that enmity goes back to the seed of Edom and Jacob and all the way back to the garden. So Christ says to them, I come in my Father's name from the transcendent realm, and you will reject me. Somebody that will come in the name, that's the name, I come in the name of my Father, and you will reject me. You will wait for somebody that comes in his own name, and him you will accept. So that's not only tying the enmity back between these two versions of reality and anti-reality. These are the types. Jesus, especially Jesus in his church and the fullness of Christ, that's both transcendent and realized in history through his church, and the Pharisees as a type that not only not only await someone to come in their own name, but they prepare the world. They are united to this figure. They are part of bringing it about. Whereas Jesus comes to bring the transcendent realm to earth for the fullness of our reality to return to our Creator. The counterfeit anti-reality version is they're going to be embedded with the Messiah that comes. And how are they going to do that? They can't go to the transcendent realm, but they go to another dimension, the ethereal realm. So this gets into a lot of stuff dealing with things like transhumanism and Kabbalah, and I can't unpack that. But part of what this project is, when I say the Pharisees, it's bringing together a return of the Tower of Babel. It's really the rebuilding of Solomon's temple. These are all types, and these can go from it goes a lot of places. It goes down into the genome project and reconnecting the DNA to create the book of life. So it's pretty involved there. It's bringing the singularity of the language together, and doing all this is connecting the what they would call heaven, the earth, and the extra dimensional, the ethereal realm coming together. And that's why the Antichrist will be able to perform signs and wonders, because he's going to be in part demonically possessed. But they share with this, they share a union with this character. So they have to become one of him. And I know this is heavy, and you can look at the last chapter of Staying Through the Singularity if this kind of stuff interests you. So, but the types are Jesus, the fullness of reality, and the Pharisees, and they remain types for us today. So the Pharisees have gone around to create the world and prepare it for the arrival of the Antichrist. They themselves have accepted their role as part of the Messianic project, seeing themselves, as we'll see with Yuri Harari, as they're gods. They're part of the God project. They're building the God project. So they're connected with the Messiah when he comes, and they will be one. I know this is a little weird, but I'm going to try to keep it simple. So you got reality, Christ, anti-reality, the Pharisees and the project that they're creating. It's the disruption and the chaos in the world to bring in the order that will be created for the arrival of the Antichrist. And the transhumanism is the central component of that. And part of that has to mean is destroying reality. And part of reality, I think I'm getting a little carried away here. Part of reality is we were made in the image of God, and God is very particular with that image. He has a contract with us how to get and reunite with him, but we have to keep our DNA intact. That's part of the deal. And so part of their project is to destroy the image of God in man and destroy the code. That's why the approach of this mRNA, which is a DNA changer, is the beginning of something. It's the opening of a door that's a very, very, very dangerous direction when we speak about those things. So again, we have the type, and Paul, a Pharisee of Pharisees, would be riding along, and he's struck down, and Jesus says, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Meaning my church. Okay, so Christ is the fullness of reality, the combination of the transcendent and the immanent, and Paul is persecuting the church in its fullness. And so we see that that's where Christ nailed himself into history, into the church, and that is how we're going to get reunited. And it's important, to the extent that these things have been destroyed, that we understand the totality and fix our minds on the historical, the hierarchical, and the symbolic as much as we can wherever we're at, and just to even see that, and then to see the enmity being played out in the world. But Christ tells us not to yoke ourselves with these Pharisees. And it's easy when we become part of the world to yoke ourselves, because part of the great deception of our day, which is this operation of air. Why do people live in an operation of air? Because they do not love the truth. Right? They do not love the truth. If you follow Christ says, if you follow me, it's going to be a hard way. You will be persecuted. So we know that people that yoke themselves with these pharisaical ideas or people, and bear in mind, When Christ went toe to toe with the Pharisees, he didn't say, you know, we have a lot in common. If we could just dialogue. No, it's very clear if we're going to follow Christ, he'll do the work. If he hardened their hearts or what he has to do, he'll do this. Our job is to follow Christ and represent him on earth. And so I think he set a pattern for us to how to deal with Pharisees and their project, in my Dr. Deep State opinion. So don't yoke yourself to these kind of people because they are of the world. And so we know even when we're, kind of integrating ourselves or accepting the ideas of the world, that's what's going on. So as we get into certain stories, I think one thing that's kind of dangerous is characters like, and that's why I don't mind using the word Pharisees, because I think the algorithms are okay with that. Pope Francis loves to throw that word around. So Pope Francis calls people that want to maintain the fullness of the faith and defend the fullness of the faith and the tradition of the faith and the historicity of the faith, the hierarchy of the faith, of the sacraments of the faith. He calls those Pharisees. So there is your classic inversion. So just like Jesus would say to the Pharisees, they're sitting on the seat of Moses, but in fact, they're Edomites. So that's part of what he revealed, the secret from the foundations of the earth, that these interlopers had gotten into the garden and usurped these positions. And this has gone full scale right now, in my opinion, just like when Herod, an Edomite, took over the King David's chair. He was the king of Israel. And this is where we're at with Francis. It's the fullness of this externalization that's going on right now. And and so if you want to know, it's inversion. So you can probably guess that the people that want to represent the fullness of the faith are probably, in fact, people of people of Jacob, people of David, people of the woman, people that are the church, the bride. That's what they're trying to participate in and be part of. So everything is this is the fullness. I think we've gotten full stop. This is upside down world. And I do believe, Francis is the Pope. I think he's supposed to be there, just like Herod was supposed to be there. That's just my opinion. So we're going to go into stories like Yuri Harari a little bit, or Jacques Attali. These are intelligence assets posing as people of people doing prophecy. Years ago, it would be characters like H.G. Wells, another insider. It looked like he had all this kind of vision of the future. Back then, they sort of had to do it in a clandestine way and get some Anglo. Today, it's the full externalization. We know who these characters are, and they're pretty bold. They're attached to the World Economic Forum, and we see what the World Economic Forum agenda is. Everything's been externalized. So the conspiracy that we have to remind ourselves with, it's not, it's not the Sasquatch and the aliens and hidden history. It's this enmity, and keep our eyes on the enmity because it works in types. So when we look at that, we can see the work of the Pharisees, and Yuri Harari is pretty open with it. When he talks about his Dadaism and his religion, it's transhumanism. And his religion, he says, he's not really concerned with the reality of the singularity and making this magic moment happen when we can live forever or download multiple languages in our brains, this magic moment. But he kind of lets the cat out of the bag. And this is what my story, Seeing Through the Singularity, is about. It's a big hoax. It's Kabbalah, which is it's really a war against reality. So when you can invert the fullness of reality, you've kind of won. You only have to as long as people believe it, it's reality. And Yuri Harari, as much as says that, he's going to rewrite the story of life. We used to believe in hoaxes like Jesus or Muhammad. But today we're going to write a new story. So that's what they're preparing the world for. And I think the people that are operating in error because they do not like the truth will be the ones that will walk into that. And I think some of these will be good people, in my opinion. But but they've yoked themselves with the world and the works of the Pharisees. So the idea of the Pharisees is to both, just down to the biological level, the mimetic level, change the minds of people. Yes, through the school system. Yes, through Hollywood. Yes, through censorship. But they have to completely eradicate the transcendent realm, the historical realm, the sacramental realm, and the hierarchical realm in order to prepare the world for the arrival of the Mashiach. And I think a lot of people will be duped. And this is where it gets tricky. I think when people are going to accept a leader that comes in his own name, these, I think, are the people that right now are waiting for a political solution. And at a supernatural level, I think a lot of what's going on in the world is a lot of things are being set up to be knocked down in part. So perhaps the parts of the World Economic Forum order and so forth. So we have to be very aware for any kind of figure that comes on the world stage in our time or beyond that comes in his own name as somebody to enlighten the world and bring him to fix the past world order and bring us into a new world order. So with that said, we're going to get into some stories, but at the end of the day, like Yuri Harari would say, free will, that's over. And it can only be over in the theater of the mind because God gave us free will. So it can't objectively be over, but they want to, that's the plan, to make us believe that is over. And that's the most important thing, I think, especially in Catholic theology, that we have to hold on to. That even when all of this stuff is enclosing around us, we have to hold on to reality and the fullness of reality. So let's get on to some of the stories for today. Okay, we're going to talk about a situation. I could choose really any country in the Western world, probably, but here close to home, Mexico's president says 10,000 migrants a day head to the U.S. border. And when you think of those kind of numbers daily, one thing that should cross your mind is that the leaders of all of our nation states have and are working with the Pharisees. And the work of the devil they are doing. And I could have picked crazy stories again from anywhere. This agency's letting 200,000 illegal aliens fly directly into the cities. So our governors who are trading us out, who pretend to be bellyaching to the other side of the aisle, they don't have to bother putting them on trains and buses. They can fly directly in. The Biden regime recently introduced a new program just to fly them right into the cities. Ain't that special? Over in Europe, Finland bust major drug ring as Sweden's organized migrant crime gangs seek to expand their territory. That headline speaks for itself. So we get now to the intersection between the immigration situation and the censorship situation. And definitely the pharisaical class doesn't want people complaining about mRNA, the immigrant situation, and other subjects, especially dealing with World Economic Forum situation. So World Economic Forum leaders put out their proposals, and to notice them, even to notice or repeat, is now something that we need to be leery of. So here we have Germany, 87-year-old woman jailed for anti-migrant social media post. So to notice this is going on, or to have an opinion, or to be enraged is dangerous. The direction of our times. Here we have a story from France. French journalist under investigation for scare quote racist question linking bedbug infestation to Paris to immigration. I looked on the news and how the mainstream covered this, and they made the guy seem like a total quack for making a link. Like he's the hater, he's the bad guy. Quick story. I was living in New York City, and I had a girlfriend, Italian, from Bologna, that I lived with. And she did some research down there in Oaxaca. Came back after, I guess she rented a $5 room down there and brought the old bedbugs in the suitcase to our loft up there in New York City. And I remember doing a little bit of research way back then, about 17 years ago, where these things tend to come from. And this is not a far out linkage. They tend to come in people's luggage from other countries. This is not like, so for really just questioning the obvious, this person is made everything. It's the inverted reality that we live in. This is the world, and the Pharisees are the masters of the theater of the mind that they have created. They have infiltrated and controlled all our bureaucracies and our leaders, and for sure our journalists. So back to this side of the world, up there in Canada, North America. Canada is now going to require podcasters to register with the government. And this is part of the surveillance state. And they're pretty much saying they want to be able to go through the content and make sure it's kosher. Again, part of the world theater. And we know who writes the scripts and does the production. And it's a production of the mind to create these new stories that we're going to be told. Nothing surprising here in the US of A. President Biden's campaign to have an attack on the disinformation, which includes the usual fair questioning the election, questioning the vax, questioning immigration. More of the same. So you're starting to see a pattern here. So the other day I brought you a story about the ability to do vaccinations in a spray form, and the idea that the ethical question at hand, according to this article, that it would be more advantageous to human liberty and autonomy to do this covertly without people's permission. Again, upside down world. Warning, this story, U.S. food supply, and I'm sure if it's going on here, it's going on everywhere, will soon be, or they chose the word contaminated with mRNA, vaccine-tainted meat. Be aware of the source of your beef, pork, and seafood. I still tend to think in part at a spiritual level, if we allow the tampering of our DNA, that is to say, how we are reflected as creatures in the image and likeness of God, a lot of that has to do with our consent. And some of that's problematized if we have an operation of error because we do not love the truth. We will, I believe, be accountable in part. But I have questions if this is done covertly to us, if we would be spiritually responsible for this. But it's just telling us that there's something attached to this. Again, it was Catherine Austin Fitts who likes to use the word Mr. Global. She doesn't like the Pharisee thing. Mr. Global. She's looking at this as a whole integrated financial, technological, and informational platform that's being inserted through the mRNA. And I give her credit for that. I think she's one of the most vocal voices out there that kind of gets what this essentially is. It's an integration of a world system of bodies preparing us for the Internet of Bodies. So, if the ultimate ontological war against reality could best be depicted as a battle against truth, the fullness of reality expressed in Christ's church, and the Pharisees, who are waiting to prepare the world for somebody who will come in his own name, we have here Pope Francis rebukes irresponsible USA on climate change compared to China. Says world's at breaking point. I think the story speaks for itself. I don't know where to begin. He's working in lockstep. There's been many, you can see shows where he'll say the script coming out of the World Economic Forum, and he'll repeat it the next few days verbatim. So he's working in lockstep with the Pharisees, calling anybody who questions the changes going on in the new, the creation of a new church. He calls them the Pharisees. So a pope should be first and foremost focused on preserving the deposit of faith, but instead he's become ideological, an ideology that attacks reality. And he is sitting in the chair of Peter. And it's interesting. And I believe that some people have eyes to see and want to approach the fullness of reality, the reality that combines and balances the transcendent and the immanent through the church, through the hierarchical, historical, sacramental nature of us being able to hold together in our fallen state, the reality that we must approach in order to be redeemed and reunite with our Creator. And Pope Francis, the church has always been great. First and foremost, the church is about the salvation of souls. Pope Francis seems to be really concerned about the environment, increasing immigration, making sure everybody has got the mRNA in their bodies. In other words, the Trans-humanist project. So I think here we have about as perfect of juxtaposition as you could probably get, which is Cardinal Zen and Pope Francis here on the world stage. Both representatives, high-ranking representatives of Christ's Church. And I would submit to you that Pope Francis is working vigorously on behalf of the Pharisees, and that this man, Cardinal Zen, is the real deal. And people that don't have the eyes to see, especially people that are apologists, especially the Pope-splainers out there that could see this man being thrown under the bus and just move on. And that's where we're at. That's where we're at. And until we fix our gaze on the fullness of reality, we shouldn't expect any different results. We should expect more of the same. So in this move toward the new Tower of Babel, so that we can all be integrated, of one mind and one speech, there's still, like I said, needs to be a lot of eggs cracked, but the ruling class plans to fix, quote unquote, the wealth gap by enslaving everyone with CBDC. So part of the UN resolution is to eliminate poverty, which means We can call it Marxism or fascism. It's a public-private partnership. Corporate communism is pretty much what the Pharisees are up to. And so part of that would be redistributing the resources of the global north to the global south at the tune of trillions of dollars a year, but ultimately linking everybody, not just through the mRNA, but of course through the central bank digital currency. If people cannot see that this is the direction that things are going, and again, the complete operating system that will integrate both the technological, the media, the financial, is essentially a merger with, yes, technology, but ultimately the ethereal realm. And that is why all of this comes back to a manipulation of our DNA, the image of God. This was precisely what was going on before the days of Noah, and we are returning to those days. And Christ told us, because he speaks both to his mind, he speaks to his own time in the imminent, but he also speaks to the eternal realm. So that's why he could say, it will be as in the days of Noah, when the man of lawlessness shall be. So this is Jacques Attali, a French intellectual, Mossad asset, and a author of A Brief History of the Future. And so he's going to tell us, what is this? I should have double checked. I think it's 2006. So about 20 years ago. He's taking a peep into the future, much like intelligence asset H.G. Wells did at the beginning of the 20th century. So immigration, we should expect third world hordes engulfing the West. You got to ask yourself, why? What does this have to do with transhumanism and the integration of everything and the Tower of Babel? The world will thus be increasingly filled with people who have become anonymous of their own free will. Now, bear in mind, when we get up there to Yuri Harari, that's his script that he is writing. Free will, that's over. The Jesus hoax, that's over. Sexuality, the elite, like they're another group. The elite goal is to remove love from sex so that they can control reproduction. So if you want total control, and this project goes back to the eugenics projects, all the way back to Malthus, who's a contemporary of Darwin. Who comes before Darwin. He's a contemporary of Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus, part of the lunatic group, and they had far-ranging goals about controlling the totality of the human population, body, mind, and spirit. So it's an old agenda. It's a resurrection. They're working in the names not only of eugenics, but the other egregore of evolution. And it's really a resurrection of an ancient worldview that was also an ontological war in the ancient world between the covenant people and the varying other people that were at war with their worldview, their unique worldview. So a media dominated by the Pharisaic culture will create an egocentric populace who will be loyal only to themselves. Again, the devil doesn't care what you worship as long as it's not the creator. Anything, it'll be varying distance from reality, but the fullness of the creation of the creator as revealed in Christ, the person of Christ. He would prefer, that it's increasingly something that's degenerate as far away as possible, but as long as it's not, he can work with it, as long as your eye is not tuned right in the fullness of reality. So the media will increasingly separate you from the image of God, from the historical, the sacramental, and the hierarchical, and bring you entirely to yourself. Why? Well, it's population control for one, but it's also idolatry. Surveillance, the main form of surveillance will be, and again, God being transcendent can see all people, all places at all times. So the devil's counter reality view of this, or attempt to do the same thing, is a worldwide surveillance system. Will be portable entertainment devices. Interestingly enough, in the United States, we have in our Constitution something called the Fourth Amendment. And it came to be implied over time as an expectation that in our homes, and even to some extent beyond us in our mail and in our computers, is an expectation of privacy. And that's just part of preserving something that's sacred. But that's been destroyed. The Fourth Amendment, nobody talks about it. It's being violated daily. And that's part of that agenda, is to poison the sacred, which is our privacy. By 2050, these machines will have evolved to allow anyone to monitor his own compliance with the norms set by the elites. So that's biopolitical and to some extent mimetic control. So we will self-police ourselves, by which so many people do today. We know the parameters of what we can say and what we cannot say. That's why most people fall short of identifying the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, between Christ and the Pharisaical class, and the preparations that they have for us in terms of their biopolitical control of the population. They want us to self-surveil. They want us to police ourselves, to get used to setting these norms, to live in fear of the Pharisees, so that we slowly adapt their norms and become one with the mindset of the Pharisees, so that we participate in the arrival of the Mashiach. Future wars around 2030. I don't know if we're getting going here a little bit ahead of time, but around 2030, this great prophet sees hyper-conflict starting, a period of tremendous violence and upheavals, out of which hyper-democracy, a one-world communitarian government, will emerge. And it'll be totalitarian, but they always like that word democracy, just like the Synod of Synodality wants to be the listening church. And that's inconsistent with the history of the church, the church that is hierarchical, sacramental, historical, is not a listening church. They're not whatever errors you're going to throw us our way, just let us listen. So the listening church is part of this one world communitarian government. Communitarian, this is a word that comes out of I'm going to say the name wrong. Edici. No, I'm saying it wrong. E.T. The Italian communitarian thinker. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes. It just fell out of my head. And so communitarianism is the best or worst of both worlds. Communism and fascism are going to be linked together. We could call it, this public-private partnership that we're living under today. I think it's a world system of corporate communism. Those seem to be antithetical words, but that's what communitarianism is. And that's going to emerge. It is emerging right now, but it needs to emerge biopolitically. So we go from self-worship, and that's going to transition to worship of the state. And the state will be these externalization of the Pharisees. So they want the worship them to transition to them for the new Messianic age. Legalization of drugs. The great prophet predicts a future world where the masses drown themselves with amusements. Oh boy, we're not there yet. To escape their insecure and meaningless lives. And we're going to see there Yuri Harari is going to say we give them drugs and we give them computer games because they have worthless lives. Of course, Yuri's life is especially important. In collusion with entertainment, drugs will be legalized to numb us down and growing insanity around us. And of course, that's what Brave New World was about. It's a prelude to this. And when we submit biopolitically to this agenda, we're participating in the plan that will bring around the lawless one. And just as the realization of Christ, we participate in the realization of Christ's final plan, by succumbing to, frankly, these sins, we participate in a sense, damn ourselves to those plans. Okay, world government. By 2060, this hyper-democracy, one world collectivist government will become a reality. And this is the time the phoenix rises. The pioneers of the system, if they're on, I'm not saying they're all power for all being, but this is the plan. This is the plan. They're working in cahoots of their father, the devil, who was a murderer from the beginning. Becoming a reality, and the pioneers of the system are what he calls transhuman. So we're going from everything from the immigration situation to bedbugs to Pope Francis and the environment, and now we are on the transhuman movement. This is all what it's about, the merger of man with the machine. And the reason this becomes ethereal is because God created us with a unique code. It's part of the image of God. And part of the deal, how we could be reunited with God, was that we were human with the potential to be connected to the divine. Transhumanist project is anti-reality. It's forsaking the image of God because you don't value it and you do not love the truth. Those people will think that this sounds alluring. Transhumanists will find pleasure in serving others in their communities. They're going to be in this new world order. Slaves, they'll be like kind of the best of both worlds, humans and robots. So you can get them to do tasks that the robot can't quite do because they'll still maintain some sense of consciousness. But they'll be slaves for the new ruling class. They will usher in an economy of altruism, of free availability, of mutual giving, of public service. They're going to give to the Pharisaical class their interests. And I have I think it was about 4 years ago, I have some slides of Michael Higger's. I went through the book and broke it down, so they're available. But this is what it says Hugger. It's supposed to say Michael Higger from 1932. It's completely consistent with this plan. This is the name of the book right here on your left-hand side. And that's the project. As far as consistency with all of these ideas, that's where it comes together. He's laying it out. And it's a Talmudic interpretation of the Old Testament and the arrival of the New Age. And that's what he deemed it. And those are the words you can't say out loud. But that would be the fullness of the reality and the enmity that the church felt comfortable speaking on all the way from the Apostle Paul until the middle of the 20th century. Now we have Catholic gatekeepers and Catholic censors and Catholic self-censors that don't allow us, because if you point this out, you're a bad person. You're not going to get the algorithms and you're not going to get on our show. And until people really want to embrace truth and embrace reality, they will continue to see the same results and the same policies coming upon the world, in my opinion. Brain chips. One day consciousness will be stored digitally, and it will be possible to live in multiple hosts. H.G. Wells and the Huxleys were talking about this 100 years ago. So this is an older plan, and it's a plan of population control. The new system is going to be, well, I just said it. Thanks to the astounding progress we can expect from nanoscience, that's where they're getting into the DNA and monkeying around with the image of God, everyone will even hope to transfer his awareness, and that's your consciousness, given to you uniquely from God, that was designed to reunite you with the Creator. It's going to be hijacked, and you can put it in another body. Now, bear in mind, the same people are going to tell you this, are going to tell you you don't have autonomy and you don't have free will. That's over. That's the words of Harari. So when we're talking about jumping bodies around in your consciousness, the seductive part in the metaverse will be like, hey, won't that be cool? I can be standing here and talking to the Zuck over here. But your free will, when you make these choices at some point, you will strip yourself of the free will. That's what you're going to be a slave. So they're going to be deciding where they're going to want to jump your consciousness from this to a beast. When I say a beast, it's a combination of two different things. It's an abomination to God. God made things and they're kind. And so it's a complete abomination. Copies of beloved people, dream men and women, hybrids, built with peculiar traits, pre-selected to reach precise objectives, all in the new utopia, complete control over the population. And it was Leonard Darwin, Charles Darwin, grandson, that wrote a book in the mid-20th century. And he would say, of course, this is back before now all these people have been externalized, like the Attelis and the Hararis, and we know who they are. They wear their colors of the Pharisees. But back then, so Leonard Darwin would write a book called The Next Million Years. And he's really talking about this time because they're going to accelerate the million years of evolution. And he was saying that we're still going to have wild men. That means everybody else will be kind of putty in terms of the control of the population. But the wild men at the top, they didn't give themselves over to the transhumanism. So transhumanism is an allure. But the people at the top, it's an allure to make you walk into this, give up the image of God. Some will even seek to overtake the human species with a life form endowed with a different and superior intelligence. Again, we have given up, if we buy into this, we've given up the free will. Which brings us to Yuval Harari. I like to call him Yuri. So there he is. All you ladies out there, I'm sorry. He's playing on another team. And I wanted to find a compilation because I've seen them online of all the crazy stuff he says. And so we live in a world, and I said, look, a few years ago, nobody gets me and my book, and that's changed. Now people get me. Once the World Economic Forum came and put it out there, now it's all kind of obvious. So when I wanted just to find a little compilation of his crazy stuff, and you just look online and it's all praise for this guy. He's been built up to be some kind of prophet. So the heroic wisdom of Yuri Harari. The ancient Greeks referred to prophets as individuals with the capacity to foresee the future. Israeli scholar Yuri would deny being a prophet because he's so humble. And he admits to not knowing how the future will unfold. But perhaps no one alive today is more skilled at describing with intelligent detail several different possible outlooks for humanity. I can almost see Christ going toe to toe with this guy. I mean, this guy, perhaps even more than Pope Francis, it epitomizes anti-reality. So what I would suggest here, this book comes out of, I think it's 2016, Homo Deus, and it's about becoming gods. But for Harari, 99% of humanity is garbage. So he's talking about a particular class of people becoming gods, the messianic class. And the project they're going to pursue and the religion they're truly pursuing. And there's nobody arguing, no, you don't speak for us. You're not part of, our intelligence project. No, this is the project. This is when we speak about somebody will come in their own name, and he you shall accept. And you're going to engage in self-worship, this class of people. And this, Yuri here is just talking about it's the Tower of Babel and schlocky slang of the Freemasons. It's Solomon's temple, but this is the most perfect template right here. The beehive. This is why they need the mRNA and the interconnection of the credit system, the financial, the media, or information system and the financial system. And then the ability to take that and remove consciousness from one being to another. And this is pretty much with what the Apocalypse, the book of Revelation, is talking about. A quote from the Brainiac, the most important question in the 21st century economics may be, what should we do with all the superfluous people? Once we have highly intelligent, non-conscious algorithms, so the algorithms that control, and this is one of the chapters in my forthcoming book about the control of the algorithms, but control of the algorithms, which is in part the biopolitical control, where we learn to police ourselves because we can't identify the enmity between the two seeds, and we dare not speak about the Pharisees and their project. Better to dialogue with them, that can do almost everything better than humans. What are we going to do? What are we, the Pharisaical class? I mean, he's telling you, the only conspiracy we need to be concerned about is identifying the seed of the woman from the seed of the serpent, and not walk in fear of the Pharisees. If humankind is indeed a single data processing system. Now, dataism or dataist, this is Yuri's religion. And this is the final, I would argue, I don't want to get into too much terminology. Kabbalism is a derivative of Talmudism, and I think it kind of reaches its final synthesis with Dadaism, and that's Yuri's religion that he's advocating here. If humankind is indeed a single data processing system, what is output? Dadaists would say that its output will be the creation of a new and even more efficient data processing system called the Internet of Things, which I've talked about all the time. The egregore is created anytime we reject the fullness of reality. So we can say that we're more full with reality, and we can point to a Protestant or point to a Buddhist, anything but point to a Pharisee. Anything but identify the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. Anything but identify Christ in the fullness of his church and the Pharisees and their project. And those that live in fear of the Pharisees are not living in the fullness of reality. And they are capable, and in fact, perhaps the most dangerous part, couriers of the egregore, that is going to prepare us for the Internet of all things. Once this mission is accomplished, Homo sapiens will vanish. And that's what the Apocalypse or the Book of Revelation is talking about, is that people have given up the image of God. They are no longer human. And here on the right-hand side, I just want to remind you of one of the quotes of Yuri's. He's thrown it around several times. The ability to hack, because he said, human beings are now hackable animals. Your code belongs to us, he's essentially saying. I mean, you're already given over your free will essentially to them because you can't identify the enmity. We put it out, we've externalized it, and you still live in fear of us. The ability to hack human beings means the ability to understand humans better than they understand themselves. The hubris. That's what I have to say about that, the hubris. Okay. This is just in case there's anybody out there that hasn't heard Yuri talk. We'll get a little taste of him here.
I look at you, I look at your eyes, I think you are a beautiful person.
We need to reinvent democracy for this new era in which humans are now hackable animals. You know, the whole idea that humans have, you know, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over. How does the baboon do it? The baboon does not take out a pen and a piece of paper or calculator and start calculating probabilities. No, the entire body of the baboon is the calculator. We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens. Within a century or two, Earth will be dominated by entities that are more different from us than we are different from Neanderthals or from chimpanzees. Because in the coming generations, we will learn how to engineer bodies and brains and minds.
Again, I think that the biggest question maybe in economics and politics of the coming decades will be what to do with all these useless people. I don't think we have an economic model for that. My best guess, which is just a guess, is that food will not be a problem. With that kind of technology, you will be able to produce food to feed everybody. The problem is more boredom and what to do with them and how will they find some sense of meaning in life when they are basically meaningless, worthless. My best guess at present is a combination of drugs and computer games.
Yuri posits that humanity, by and large, at least the intelligent people, have accepted the Nietzschean proposition that God is dead. And although Yuri can picture these entities of the future being far different than we are today, he doesn't think we can leave the idea of narrative. In fact, that's why the Pharisees have monopolized the narrative on a world scale. And so Yuri is going to suggest here that the most important narrative is what I've suggested, is what came into the Renaissance West, is the story of humanism. Because the whole story of humanism, it culminates in his book, Homo Deus, making ourselves God, at least some of us. Of course, bear in mind that the masses are useless junk, and what are we, gods, going to do with them? You have to take this language quite seriously. So let's hear a little bit from Yuri.
The antidote to a meaningless and lawless existence was provided by humanism, a revolutionary new creed that conquered the world during the last few centuries. The humanist religion worships humanity, and expects humanity to play the part that God played in Christianity and Islam, and that the laws of nature played in Buddhism and Taoism. Whereas traditionally, the great cosmic plan gave meaning to the life of humans, humanism reverses the roles and expects the experiences of humans to give meaning to the great cosmos. According to humanism, humans must draw from within their inner experiences not only the meaning of their own lives, but also the meaning of the entire universe. This is the primary commandment humanism has given us: create meaning for a meaningless world.
Pull this plane in and so Dr. John Lennox, he's on faculty, unless he's now retired, Irishman, taught at Oxford, brilliant, top of his field. And he's going to make some comments about AI, Yuri, and possibly the most dangerous of them all, long-termism, which is one way of talking about evolution, something that has no evidence but cannot be empirically demonstrated. It's just made believable, this story that trillions and trillions of years ago, and on and on. So he's going to talk about AI, define the two types of it. He's going to look at the moral and ethical dimensions of it, talk about disinformation and influencing people. And he's not talking about the disinformation that Trudeau's talking about or Biden's talking about, or their foisting upon the German and French population that we mentioned today. He's talking about the surveillance state in this Orwellian sense. It's the work of the devil to try to usurp God and know the thoughts and minds of everybody, and in fact seize the control of the thoughts and minds of everybody. Here's a couple of his thoughts on Yuri. Firstly, Harari is not a scientist. He's a historian. He concerns me, Dr. Lennox said, because of his very widespread influence that he gets. I don't think because of the power of his influence, but because he's part of the Pharisaic class that promotes him. But I'm going to try not to interfere with, with the narrative here. He really is an influencer. What he actually has to say concerns me more because of its inaccuracy, and his reading of history seems to me to be very strange. In Harari's second book, Homo Deus, he refers to the quote-unquote God-man, or the man who is God. And that's the pinnacle of the humanist narrative that came about in Western civilization during the Renaissance. Okay, in his book, Dr. Lennox explains, quote, Harari says that there are two major agenda items for the 21st century. The first is to solve the technological problem of human death. He regards it as a technical problem, and a technical problem with a technical solution. And then secondly, to enhance human happiness. The idea of solving the problem of death is a very ancient one, he added. Quote, on enhancing human happiness, his target is, and this is more or less a quote, is to turn Homo sapiens into Homo Deus. In other words, to turn humans into gods. This is a very ancient thing. And once I noticed that, I felt we were back in the early chapters of Genesis. And that's hugely important culturally, because the idea of humans becoming God has permeated history. And it's been behind many dictatorships in ancient Babylon, Syria, Egypt, and even way right into modern times, we find people essentially playing God. And Harari is encouraging people to think that they can become gods by simply solving a technical problem and then possibly upgrading themselves. Now, as a Christian, I really have got something to say about that, Dr. Lennox said. When people tell me this, as they do, I say, "You're late." And they look at me and say, "What do you mean we're late? We haven't got there yet." Oh, or sorry, I should have said it more like a question. "We haven't got there yet?" Oh, I say, "Yes, you haven't got there yet. You're too late." Why am I late? Well, I say the problem of physical death was solved 20 centuries ago when Jesus Christ was raised by the power of God from the dead. And as for enhancing human happiness and uploading ourselves into some higher form, that's also been solved, because as this gives me a real opportunity to explain Christianity against the background of the promises that the transhumanists like Harari are offering. I say, look, it would be good for you, therefore, to listen to Christianity, which is actually a lot more evidence-based than Harari's transhumanist promises, when it tells us that everybody who faces the mess that they've made of their own lives and perhaps those of others. And I simply point out that there's no road to utopia that can bypass the problem of human moral failure and sin. And that's the mistake that most dictators have made. But if they're prepared to repent of that and face it and trust Christ as Savior and Lord, then He promises them that He'll raise them from the dead and upload them into the world to come. So there's nothing new under the sun. We live in the conditions of the fall of Adam and Eve. And God spoke to Adam and Eve and said, "I have a plan for a redemption, but it involves being able to identify the enmity between two seeds." And some of that information was lost from the foundations of the earth. But Christ revealed it to us. He said that intruders have come into the garden. And within the wheat, these tares exist, and sometimes it's very difficult to identify them. That means the seeds of enmity. And Christ illustrated the types for us. Him, the fullness of reality that would be apparent to us in the visible church, in its hierarchy, in its historicity, and in its sacraments. And the antithesis of that, which would be the Pharisees. The people that find their fulfillment ultimately of escaping the world and living forever, find it in the fullness of Christ and the reality of Christ. And those that are lost in our age of deception through an operation of error because they did not love the truth, the fullness of the truth, and the fullness of identifying that Pharisaical class who is preparing the world for the arrival of one who will come in his own name. So I think I'm going to stop there. Again, I appreciate all of you, anybody that watches the program and gets something out of it. And I'm going to get back to you real soon. This has been Dr. Deep State, and I hope you all are doing well.